Greetings again with the Oral History Program. I'm Ray Mofield, and today we're visiting in the home of Ray Hall. Ray, we appreciate very much your letting us come.
Well, thank you, Ray. I'm glad to have you here.
It's a beautiful home, a beautiful day. I see you've mowed your yard, and do you have a garden?
This first year in my life, I didn't have a garden. I don't have one.
Well, okay. We've had a lot of rain lately, and before, of course, it's a little bit on the dry side. Well, Ray, I've known you for a long, long time. Where you, of course, I lived on the south side of the county, and I guess you lived on the north side. Were you born here?
I was born in Gilbertsville.
Gilbertsville. Well, that's just up the road, what, 2, 3, 4 miles or so?
4 or 5 miles.
4 or 5 miles. I've driven that road, of course, between Gilbertsville and Calvert a number of times in recent years. Well, Gilbertsville was quite a railroad town, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was probably the biggest reason that the town grew up there.
Yeah.
Railroading the river.
I was startled yesterday. The lady came in my office, and she was talking about when I had developed the educational radio station at Murray State, WKMS, which you may have heard. And she said to me, I just heard a program this morning that originated in a place that kind of shocked me when I heard the name. It was Gilbertsville, New York. And said, I sort of had in mind, although I was born in New York, I'd never heard of it, and I thought maybe Kentucky had the only Gilbertsville in the world, but now we know New York has a Gilbertsville.
Yes, I'd heard that.
Well, who was your dad?
My dad's name was Earl Hall. He was a great fan of yours when you was announcing ball games.
I remember Mr. Earl. I surely do.
Yes, sir.
A wonderful person, and he was more complimentary of me than he should have been. I'm afraid I didn't live up to some of the things he said about me, but of course I appreciated it. Now, who was your mother?
Well, she was Lula Ford before she married, and her family grew up around Scale.
Yes, I know. Since I married Ezra Blumenberg's daughter, Ezra and Ruth, or Janie, Mama Mo, the kids at the high school always called her. And I know there were some Fords in that neighborhood who went to Oak Valley.
Yeah, that's where they went to church, Oak Valley.
Mm-hmm. And so you're kin to the Fords then, and obviously kin to the Halls. Do you happen to remember any of your 4 grandparents?
Yeah, I remember them all. On my mother's side, she was a Ford, a Heath, and a Peck, a Brown. Those were the 4 families that my mother came from, and the Pecks and Heaths still live, and I guess I'm kin to nearly all of them in this county.
It sounds like mainline Oak Valley scale.
That's what it was.
Yeah, well, that's just wonderful.
I can remember going back to Oak Valley about once a year. They'd have a big homecoming dinner on the ground and meet all my mother's people. And
we have a lot of fun about that. I've been going every year. In recent years, they have it on the 3rd Saturday in August. And somebody, I don't know, Bill Ross or some joker, I don't know if you know Bill Ross or not, he married Henrietta Peck, but he said, well, this is the University of Oak Valley reunion. So that's what we call it now.
You wouldn't believe how we got there. It's 15 to 16 miles from here, but I can remember going buggies and wagons, fill up the back of the wagon with hay, and all the children, family goers. It was all-day trip, start early. And
you know, the modern generation might think of that as being a hardship, but really it was fun.
Oh, yeah, it was fun. We'd stop over here at old Uncle John Peck's place, and we just loved to hear him talk. He talked real slow, and I guess that's where I get mine, the way I talk.
Yeah, Oh, those were fun days, riding in a wagon with hay, and of course, Dad and Mom, I guess, were on what we called a spring seat.
Yeah, they had
Sitting
spring
up
seats set
front.
up front.
And the children could play and just frolic in the back. Well, that's wonderful. Now, since you were born in this area, does that mean you went to Gilbertsville School?
Yes, I was born in Gilbertsville and went to school there and lived there until the dam was built, and then I moved as close as I could,
Mhm.
about 4 or 5 miles down Calvert. That's the only places I've ever lived.
So you've always basically been right here in this immediate vicinity.
Yeah, right on Tennessee River.
I know, let's see, you were out of high school a little before I was, I guess. I started in the fall of '36. And back then, I can remember the district tournament, 4th district tournament. There were 8 Marshall County high schools and 8 Callaway, and that made a Sweet 16 for the district tournament.
Well, that's right. I'll go back a little further than that. When I started high school in 1928, I believe Benton had the only gymnasium in the county. I'm not sure of that, but I believe it was. I know Calvert and Gilbertsville both played on outdoor courts.
Well, I can add Hardin to that. I know, because in Aurora at least, Hardin's old high school building burned in February '37, and they went to school there in the Church of Christ building and the Baptist and the Methodist. There were 3 churches there then, and they used those. Then they built one with a gym, and it opened I guess it didn't quite get it ready for fall '37. It's probably spring '38 before they really played in it.
I believe we had one at Gilbertsville and here at Calvert both a little before that. I know I helped build the one at Gilbertsville. They allowed school kids $1 an hour, but we had to donate half of it back.
Yeah.
We dug the basement with pond scrapers, and we built it out of a used brick and block building, and we cleaned those mortar off of the blocks. And the men worked for $1.50 an hour, and they also donated half of their time, making 75 cents. And we built that gymnasium that way. Of course, we had carpenters and bricklayers that we had to bring in from outside.
Well, that's a similar story. The county system had 6 high schools, and Hardin and Benton were city schools. And I know when, of course, the Depression was still on in '37, and the county board said, we can't build that building back for you, but if you will build it, we'll staff it with teachers and run it and take it over and accept it as a county high school. So that's what they did, and my mother gave chickens, and all the women in the country gave chickens. Some gave money if they had it. We worked for nothing, cleaning brick out of the old brick building and saving everything they could, and the men donated teams and labor, and they put that building up very much the same way you're talking about. Well, do you remember any of your early teachers?
Yeah, I imagine I remember all of them. I've always kind of been fond of my teachers. I guess Mr. Noah Philbeck was first teacher that I ever had, and
Oh, I remember her at the funeral home.
yes,
Yeah.
I respected her and all the rest of my teachers. I went to school probably next to Miss Bonnie Stringer at that time. She's She married,
Yes,
you know,
I know that lady. I surely do.
She's a Bonnie Stringer. Miss Prudy Lawrence later married Metcalf.
Mm-hmm.
Was one of my early teachers. Miranda Young, Helen Stone. You know.
Oh, I
Miss
certainly.
Gardner.
Helen Stone Gardner, yes,
Yeah.
originally from Olive and around Hardin. Then she married Louis Gardner and taught. Well, she taught in the Marshall County system until she retired,
Well,
and she's living now in Benton.
I guess the first time I was exposed to going to school to a man teacher was Omer Stagner, and I guess I always considered him the very best. Some way he knew how to motivate
Young boys.
to teach, and then you could kind of learn when you get motivated. And
Did he live around Sharp?
He lived at Sharp, run a little grocery store after he quit.
I
I believe
remember.
he ran for county court clerk maybe once.
I remember him.
Wyman Jones, Mr. Jones is gone, but he's a wonderful teacher. And Vernon James, I know you know Mary Lee.
Yes.
She was my first. She was one of the first three teachers when we had a 4-room high school at Gilbertsville, and I guess was one of the best disciplinarians that I ever went. Best English teacher. And she expected you.
And either she or her sister, one or maybe both, were musicians also.
Ruby Lee was her sister. She also taught music, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have music.
I can remember some concerts they gave, or she gave, at Hardin with violin and so on.
I believe Miss Margie Ross lived over around your part of the county.
Yes,
She was
that's
one of
right.
my, and I guess John Kennedy probably was one of the toughest. He was the principal the first year we had a 4-room high school, but he wasn't a coach, and we didn't have a coach. He and Mr. Earl Walker were the men teachers, and when we got the gym built, we needed somebody to coach, and of course somebody teaching had to do that. And for some reason he left. Mr. James, I always thought he was a great coach, Vernon James.
Mm-hmm.
He also knew how to motivate you and to coach you. I guess one of the, that I think about now, funniest incidents, we'd kind of got out of hand, some of us older boys, with Miss Margie Ross.
Mm-hmm.
And it was her first year teaching. She didn't know how to deal with 17, 16-year-old boys. And we did that there for a couple of weeks. Finally, one afternoon, Mr. James said, "I'm going to put a stop to that." Said, "Well, we can't do that." And I didn't know how he was going to put a stop to that. And he said, "I'm going to find out who's doing it." I didn't know how he'd do that. I knew wasn't anybody going to come up there and tell him, but he knew how. I sat on the outside row behind Benny Womack. Benny sat on the very front seat, and I sat right behind him. I don't know why he had Benny up there front. I know why he did me. He said, "We're going to find out who did this." He said, "Now everybody think about it. I'm kind of putting you on your honor." He said, if you haven't seen Benny throw any erasers and paper wads and chalk, raise your hand." Well, every hand in the house, went up. Benny just didn't do that kind of stuff. But I was next. He said everybody hadn't seen Ray throw paper wads and erasers. And I held up my hand, and I looked, and it was the only hand that was up. He said, "You just keep your seat." Well, when he got through, he took it one at a time like that. Christy and me, and C.T. Herndon, Hick James, his brother, and I'll not name all the rest of them. But he did give us a choice when he got through. He said, "Now, you guys can either write the whole Constitution, just write a copy it word for word and hand it in at the end of the week, or you can take a whipping." We said, "What's this whipping going to be like?" He said, "It's going to be 10 licks with a paddle."
Yeah.
And he said, "I'll give you a little bit of choice." Said, "You can take 5 at a time, or you can take all 10 of them." C.T. said, "I'll just take 5 at a time." And when we saw him get his, well, we all the rest of us had to take it all, Well, when CT come back for his last 5, he forgot he had done give him, and he gave him that 6th, and you couldn't see a man come up any quicker. He came up like he played ball. He sure found out.
Yeah. That's, well, I went to a school teacher named Hugh Hurt, and I saw him a Saturday a week ago, and I reminded him about how hard a whipping he gave me one time for running off from school. And he said, well, I'm kind of ashamed of that now. And I said, well, don't be. You might have kept me out of the penitentiary.
I'll tell you one thing, there wasn't any of these kids that took the whipping, went home and told their parents.
I know. I didn't tell that because I'll tell you, my dad had been to school the first day, and he'd said to the teacher, you let me know, and I'll give him a good one when he gets home. So do you think I went home and told it?
Well, that's just about the attitude every parent had, but today you're kind of afraid to punish a kid.
Right. Well, those are wonderful experiences, and the memories are great. Now, right at the time, I guess the Apostle Paul wrote that when we're punished at the time, it said it doesn't seem so good, but the end result is good. At least it's intended that way. And I suppose it helped you.
I've never had any feeling about any punishment my teachers or my parents, either one, gave me. I thought I missed more probably than I got.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. So you were graduated from Gilbertsville High School then in the class of about 32?
32.
Now, let's see. I remember one of the greatest basketball players I ever knew was a fellow named Red Metcalf. Leonard was his name. We called him Red. And he went to Gilbertsville till they closed it because of building the dam.
He played on the last team they had, and then he went to Eddyville and was aimed to play over there, but he had his girlfriend at Calvert, and he fooled around and lost that year's eligibility to come back. He moved back to Calvert one day, too late to...
Oh, well, I'd forgotten that. He went to Murray State when I did.
Yeah, he would fit in with Joe Little and Pat.
Well, now,
Herbert Hurley, he'd fit in with some of the best players we ever had right there, and would have really made Calvert City
a powerhouse. Yeah, they certainly would. Oh, if you could have done that and had Joe Fawkes too. Now, he had to leave Birmingham that same year.
Well, he and Leonard both went to
Catawba. And Joe stayed.
And Joe stayed and played, but Leonard came back to Calvert and lost that year's eligibility. He didn't play anywhere.
Well, World War II came along some years in there. Were you involved in that in any way?
I was the principal and coach and the only man teacher in the school at Calvert City.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was going to Paducah, and I heard him say the recruiting officer's going to be and told where his office would be. And when I got through leaving there, I said I'd volunteered to go into the service, and I was in the Navy for about 20 months.
Yeah.
I rode up after that, and before they got my commission through with Red Terry. We went, and we was both going to be inducted. Well, they canceled that and quit taking people that was our age, and he never did have to go, but I'd done made this commitment for a commission in the Navy, and I spent about 20 months.
And
I never have regretted that either.
No.
My oldest...
Where did you go to school after Gilbertsville?
I went to Murray first, and then I finished at Western.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, Red went to Western, didn't he?
No, Red went... Oh, Red Terry?
Terry.
Yeah, he played at Western.
Now, he was on that 1932 team that went to the state and won the first round game, and I believe Bob Goheen was on that.
I believe that was the best
Sanders Watkins?
The best team I ever saw in Marshall County. I really believe it was the best team I ever saw.
Mm-hmm. I bet they were fighters anyway.
Well,
Terry always made his team stay in shape and go, go, go. And
Wilford Baker and Robert Cox and the ones you've named,
mm-hmm.
Cecil Dunnigan,
Yeah.
they were a good ball team.
Well, that's fine. Now, when did you marry?
I married before I got out of the last year I was at Western, 1938.
Mm-hmm. And you married whom?
I married a local girl, Irene Butler. She was Ben Butler, and
Mm-hmm.
her mother was a Frisale, so she's kin to nearly all the Frisales, I guess, around in this
Mm-hmm.
county. We have 2 children now, and both of them are teaching school, and both of them are getting older, and I'd want to.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't want you to tell their age.
No, I wouldn't.
But do they? I remember a girl named Mitzi.
Mitzi's the older one. She teaches here at Calvert, and the younger daughter's Rena Fay, and she teaches at Smithland.
Mm-hmm. In a county adjoining us,
Yes.
just across the river over there. Well, that's really a wonderful life history. Now, do you have any grandchildren?
I have 3 boys, 3 grandsons. One of them's a senior at University of Kentucky this year, and I think he's going to try to go to law school after he gets through that. Rena has 2 boys, Ray Hale and Ryan Hale.
Mm-hmm.
Ray will be on this. I think Ray will have a good chance to play basketball next 2 or 3 years here
Uh-huh.
at Marshall County High School. He's an excellent little athlete, and Ryan is about 9 or 10 years old. He's not big enough yet to know what he can do.
Yeah. Well, we still have about 7 minutes left to go, and I would like for you, if you would, to talk about whatever you'd like, but particularly, could you describe Gilbertsville in the early days? What the businesses, maybe some of them that were there?
I guess farming was the chief business, but it wasn't like it is today. Most of the farming was done by farmers that owned about 2 or 3 head of work stock. Some of them would have a third one, you know. There was 2 farmers that was bigger than that, Mr. Shirley Jones and Mr. J.R. Gregory. They both had 4 or 5 teams and would employ boys around there to help make the crops for them. The railroad, there wasn't any industry. There wasn't anywhere to go get a job. The railroads provided a few jobs. I can think of, in the railway mail service was my dad and Mr. George Hayes and Bert Kennedy. They all worked
So there
as
were
railway mail
4
carriers.
men
On,
there.
yes, on that. Then there was several, Ray Metcalf and George Houston, I believe Boris Howard, and another one or 2 that worked as flagman or signalman or engineer. Casey Jones was another. I guess I'm forgetting some of them that did that. And then we had a bridge across the Tennessee River, railroad bridge, but the big barges and boats couldn't get under it, so they had a turn section, and it required a man around the clock. And there was 4 people that I can remember well that did that. It was Norman Moore and Jonas Martin, Oscar Dixon, and Pony Sellers.
So there were 4 more jobs.
There was some jobs that the railroad provided, and then there was what they called a section gang. They did a lot more work, seemed to me like then, on improving, but they didn't have any equipment like they do today. They did it with picks and shovels and hammers.
Yeah.
and they had to keep the rails, and there was a lot of people that worked on the section, but now that soon separated the boys and the men. That was hard.
Hard work.
It was either too hot to work or too cold. It wasn't any in between working on the railroad. I can remember
Yeah.
that was terrible job, hard.
I know there were so many, since you mentioned that, there were so many people employed on the section that at Hardin there were a row of houses that the railroad owned. I don't know, they always seemed like they were painted yellow and green, and they supplied homes for their section hands. There'd be a foreman, and maybe he had a little bigger house than the others. And the strange thing to me was there were section houses at Benton too, and one at Murray.
Yeah. There's every few miles they'd have a little section gang. Then the river provided some employment, like fishing and people catching mussels and cooking out the shells. I don't know how the business places made it go. There was always 4 or 5 stores. You'd call them grocery stores maybe, but there's more than that. You could buy gas, you could sell a chicken, or you could
get a plow line or
get
a horse collar.
Or collar, whatever. They just had about, you couldn't go anywhere. They had to keep the stuff that you needed. But I don't know how 4 or 5 of them, because didn't anybody have money. We were right in the heart of the Depression. You buy sugar or salt, they'd go scoop it up with a little scoop out of a barrel, and
Yeah.
there was always 4 or 5 stores. There was 2 blacksmith shops, and I don't know how they survived. They'd shoe your horse for about $1, $25 now. There was a barber shop that provided, I guess, the best loafing place. Barber shops stayed open till everybody ready to go to bed. There wasn't any radio or television, and so the barber shop was one of the high points of loafing. There's at least 1 or 2 service stations. There wasn't any cars, but few. There's a couple of service stations. I remember there was a flour mill, and I can remember it was necessary to have it because farmers would raise a little wheat and a little corn, and that's where you get your meal and flour. You'd go down there. I can remember him cranking up and grinding flour and meal. There was a few people that made cross ties, and again, that'd separate the men and the boys pretty quick.
Well, that must have been hard.
It was all handwork.
Swinging an axe all day would be...
And you'd be surprised how skilled, if you try to do the same thing, it'd be nearly impossible. They became skilled at doing that. There was a thrashing machine. Mr. Gregory had a thrashing machine, and such as that, you had to have your own business. There's others. I remember Bronson Moore had a little undertaker funeral home place there. People just had to provide some way to make a living. Of course, there's professional people like the doctors. There's always about 2 doctors. One anyway, Dr. Carter was just. I can remember Dr. Carter. He had probably one of the first radios. When World Series time, he lived right across from the school ground. World Series time come, where we'd just hang right in there till we hear the bell ring. We'd have to go to school. But I thought, man, I'd give anything if I could just hear
the rest of that.
Hear the rest of that World Series. That was way back there, longer than people want to remember.
Well, I'll tell you, those are wonderful stories. You're a great storyteller, Ray. I wish we had more time, but there's only a minute left, and I'll give you that 1-minute warning. So if you've got anything that's really on your heart you want to say, well, we better get into it, I guess.
Oh, I don't know anything I'd want to add. It was hard times, and I wouldn't want to go back to it at all, but I don't regret that that I had to
But you
live
can't
through
do it.
that time. I
Many
can,
of us, I think, feel the same way.
I can remember going to baseball games, walking to Grand Rivers, walking across this bridge we're talking about, or getting in the back end of Tom Satterfield's old stock truck and going to Ledbetter, somewhere that's too far to walk. But I guess boys wouldn't play. You got to go provide them a playground now. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, I tell you, I've enjoyed every minute of this interview with you, and we thank you very much. We've been visiting in the home of Ray Hall at Calvert City. I'm Ray Mofield, and we return you now to our studio.